Argentina depth chart for 2022, folks. Obviously, they had a change of management, did the Pumas, between 2021 and 2022. Michael Cheika taking over from Mario Ledesma. But what did we see? What was different from 2021 into 2022? And, which players kind of were favoured? Did Michael Cheika go through the whole rotation thing, or was he relatively consistent? We're going to compare it to also some of the other teams like Ireland and New Zealand and Australia and South Africa, who we've already looked at. And, you guys can let us know your thoughts on how the Pumas went for 2022. So, the win-loss record was a bit of a mixed bag. Because, they're still in the season with a negative record, 5 wins and 7 losses. But they win their home series to Scotland 2-1. They win the first and the last game and then lose the kind of one in the middle. And it's almost like an example of how the Pumas were this year. I should say last year, because we're already in 2023. So they can quite easily get a good result and then absolutely follow it up with a stinker. And that's pretty much what we saw. So they win the home series against Scotland. Then the Rugby Championship comes along. They split their games with Australia and New Zealand. So they lose the first one to Australia pretty badly, 41-26. But then bounce back the next week, 48-17. So absolute reversal. And then the same thing happens with the All Blacks. Like, phenomenal win, 25-18. Their first ever win in New Zealand over New Zealand. And then the next week they get beaten by 50 points against the same opposition. So, it's really a mixture. They lose both their games against South Africa, which was a little bit of a disappointing way for them to round out the Rugby Championship. And then their autumn series starts with, again, a really historic win. First win over England in England for years, 30 points to 29. And then they lose to a pretty poor Welsh side, which saw Wayne Pivac get sacked. And then they get hammered by Scotland, 52-29, albeit with a red card during that one. But, real mixture. Quite happy to get a historic win one week and then get absolutely well beaten the next. That just seems to be, or put in a poor performance the next. Seems to be what we got a wee bit from Argentina. But going into a World Cup, all they need to do is put a few performances together, and you never know. Because if you can beat New Zealand in New Zealand, I know New Zealand's not quite what they were in like 2015, but still, if you can beat New Zealand in New Zealand, you probably could say you could beat anyone on your day, right? Positional stuff. What did we see from the Pumas this year from Cheika? Remember, Cheika came into this year saying he wants to focus on the basics. He wants to get their set piece right, the kind of ruck and maul stuff right. He wants to get the real, the fundamentals right, and then he's going to kind of build from there. He was also concerned about the guys who don't really get a proper off-season, because these guys, once they finish with the Rugby Championship, they go to play for their clubs in Europe. So he was kind of going a bit easy on the training and whatnot, having to manage these guys in a situation where they're pretty much playing rugby all year round. But looking at the front row, we'll start with loosehead prop. And Thomas Gaggio is there as your main guy in green for number 1. And he's been a revelation. I think he's doing really well. He's great around the park, and his scrummaging has gotten a lot better, I think, in this year. So we're seeing him mature, still a very young man. He's had around about half the game time. And then Tetes Chaparro is there in blue. He gets just over a third of the game time. And then Vivas has been back into the 23 there in yellow. And I think as far as depth charts go, that looks pretty healthy. Even the least amount of minutes guy in Vivas has still had at least like kind of 10% of the game time this year. So first guy, second guy, third guy, I think that's broken down pretty well. So, going into a World Cup, the two main guys in the backup, I think, looks healthy. Hooker, well, obviously Montoya's there in green. He is the captain. He's been in phenomenal form for a couple of years now, so it's no surprise that he gets, more than 2/3 of the game time. So it's kind of to be expected. You would expect your captain to be leading from the front. Krevi's return has been an interesting one, so he's there in blue. We didn't see him at all in 2021. From what some of the Argentinian people tell me, there's kind of politics that goes on in Argentinian rugby. And, Ledesma kind of fell into that trap a little bit. This is just what people have told me. But obviously with Cheika being maybe an outsider, doesn't have as much of that going on. So Krevi's return, I think, was a welcome one. So he gets around about a quarter of the game time. And then you got Ignacio Ruiz in yellow and Santiago Socino there in purple. So a little bit of game time from them. Not a heck of a lot, but in Krevi and Montoya, you've genuinely got two pretty classy operators, albeit Krevi getting a wee bit on in terms of the age, but if he's the backup guy, that's not such a big deal. And then tight head prop, you've got Cordella there in green, Sclavi there in blue, and then Bejo there in yellow. Those are kind of the main three guys. That's the most even spread of the front rowers, where like Cordella has got less than half the game time despite being the main guy, so he's not got that much more game time than Sclavi, and then Bejo is about a quarter of the game time. Santiago Medrano did get a little bit of game time there in purple, but way down from what he got last year. Medrano was kind of a regular fixture. Sclavi, I don't even think played last year, and Bejo's minutes have gone well up. So tight head prop is the one that probably changes the most of the front rowers this year. I mean, some guys who we didn't see, Pierretto, didn't get to play this year. Facundo Bosch, obviously, is not even the fourth choice guy based on the guys that got picked. Facundo Gijena was one of the main guys last year at loosehead. Muzio got some game time. Rodrigo Martinez. So, yeah, Cheika seems to kind of have streamlined things and brought a few guys into the fold that he wanted to see in the likes of Vivas and Crevi and Sclavi. So, yeah, that's the kind of front row as it stands for Argentina. In terms of the locks, it's pretty steady as she goes. There's not real big changes. It's the same guys that played last year, but there is a little bit of change in the minutes. If we're looking at the number 4 jersey, your loose head lock, that's Matias Alemano there in green. He's got more than half the game time, and that's a lot more than he got last year because Guido Petty is there in blue. Those guys kind of swap places. Petty was the main guy last year, but he's kind of been rotated in and out a little bit this year. And then Marcos Crema has also featured a little bit in the second row there. And then Thomas Lavanini, goodness gracious me, almost 3/4 of the game time as your tight head lock. I think he's cleaned up his game a bit under Michael Cheika. He's still got at least 1 or 2 cards, which have kind of been taken into account here. But I feel like at least one of them was like the team penalty, where it's like, penalty, next one's going to be a yellow card, and then it's Lavanini, rather than the kind of brain explosion Lavanini that we maybe are too used to seeing. So he's there, and I thought generally had a pretty good year. Alemano also is there in blue, so he features on both sides. Lucas Paulos is there in yellow, kind of a little bit starved for game time, but he's a big unit, and then Crema appears there as well. So Crema, certainly a bit of a jack of all trades because he appears in multiple positions. But yeah, the 3 main guys, Lavanini, Petty, and Alemano, that's no change from last year, with Crema able to kind of step in as that lock loose forward, is what I would say. And then Paulos is kind of the next cab off the rank if injury were to strike one of the main 3 guys. The back row, remembering Argentina don't play a traditional blind side, open side, and number 8. They tend to play left flank, right flank, and number 8. I mean, you could look at the body shape of the guys and go, Gonzalez, despite the fact that he's got 6 and plays on the left, he's more like an open side. And then Crema, the big unit who plays with 7 on his back, is more like a traditional blind side. But just for what it's worth, that's how they tend to line them up. So at 6, Juan Martin Gonzalez, goodness me, 80+% of the game time, and has been a revelation. Like, he got some game time last year, but no way near this much game time. And he has been in phenomenal form all year. He's getting tries, catching high balls. He's got gas. He makes tackles. Really one of the best loose forwards in the world, I thought. Probably the star of the Argentinian back row, which is chock full of talent. So to say that is a big statement, but I think it's fair. He's there in the number 6 jersey. Matera is there also in blue. Obviously, he played a lot more 6 last year, but a lot more 8 this year, so we'll get to him in a minute. Grondona is there in yellow, and then Petty can also drop into the back row if needs be. He's there in purple, but mostly the number 6 has been about Gonzalez this year, and then Crema there in number 7. So both the flanks have been pretty consistent. It's mostly been the kind of big guy and the skills guy, if you want to put it that way. So, Crema, that big body, has less lock time this year, much more time on the flank. And then Matera pops in there as well in blue again. So he is a bit of a jack of all trades. Grondona again. And then Facundo Isa and Pedro Rubiolo also had a bit of a cameo at one point during the season. And then number 8, it's more about Matera this year. He's got 2/3 of the game time there. So more 8, like I said, than 6 this year for him. Which meant Facundo Isa has also had limited minutes. He's there in blue for number 8. But similar to what he played last year, he was always a bit of a kind of a bit part player. Bruni is one of the guys there in yellow whose minutes have absolutely fallen off a cliff. I can't remember if Bruni was injured or not, but certainly Bruni I think was the leading number 8 last year in terms of game time. But yeah, didn't get anywhere near that same game time this year. And then you got cameos from Gonzalez and Crema there at number 8 too. But I mean, mostly the back row has been pretty consistently Gonzalez, Crema, and Matera when all available and fit. So that's the forward pack. I mean, a couple of guys like Horizon and Lozana are guys who haven't featured in 2021, but I do think like back rowers for Argentina, they are, you know, pretty well serviced. I think there's more guys that miss out than some other teams, just because it's pretty competitive, and like Michael Cheika seems to be playing his regulars pretty regularly. Into the backs, it's also relatively consistent. Number 9, Gonzalo Bertrano, that's like he's got almost 70% of the game time. He certainly seems to be the favoured guy from Michael Cheika, although Kubeli, I seem to remember spending a bit of time out injured, so that probably helped. A couple of the bit part player guys, Velez, Escura, and Morales. These guys featured kind of ever so briefly, but if you're looking at the main 2 guys, it's certainly Kubeli and Bertrano. And then number 10, Nico Sanchez is another one who got injured, so Carreras has had almost more game time than anyone else in any one position, but not quite. We're going to get to someone who's had more time than him, but Carreras, more than like 85% of the game time. He's just been an absolute fixture for the Argentinians at number 10, and it's weird because his game itself seems to have shifted a little bit. Like he was doing a lot more running, but he's doing a lot more kicking now, so maybe his game is kind of changing as he gets more into that number 10 role, because he's obviously came into the side as an outside back. And then Uri Pajeta is your guy there in blue with like less than 10% of the game time, but he's a veteran, so you feel like he could kind of step up at any time if needs be. And then Nico Sanchez there in yellow, like I mentioned, like started the year and finished the year with Argentina, but spent a lot of time injured. But him and Uri Pajeta, you feel like with their experience, you know, if they were needed at the World Cup, if Carreras happened to be injured, it's not going to take much for them to get into the swing of things, just because they've been there and done that. Some of the younger guys, Albanoz got a little bit of game time, and then Miotti had like 4 minutes. So, yeah, some of the younger guys, or the Miotti's not that young anymore, in his mid-20s. That guy's like, years are just kind of ticking by. He's been the guy I've kind of wanted to see get a bit more game time for Argentina since probably this channel started. So that's, yeah, a wee while ago now. So, yeah, Miotti's Argentinian minutes, very, very limited. But Carreras seems to be the main guy. Gonzalo Garcia is one guy who got a bit of game time previously, but again, as the kind of 3rd or 4th choice 9. So he just seems to be down the pecking order, but I also seem to remember he was injured at the start of the season as well. Midfield is maybe where we see a little bit of age creeping into the Argentinian lineup, and we'll get to the age in a minute, but the 12 jersey is Geronimo de la Fuente with like 2/3 approximately of the game time. He is the favoured choice at 12. Remember, he famously got injured as well when he was scoring that try. Was it against Australia or South Africa? And when he kind of hobbled over the line. So spent a little bit of time on the sidelines. Matias Orlando, who's come back into the side, I think he played last year. Another one of the veterans and played really well. There at 12 in blue. And then Matias Moroni, the 2 Matias guys in the midfield. Sometimes I need to remember which one is which, but they don't look anything alike. So it's kind of easy enough to tell them apart. Just the fact their names are both Matias. Yeah, he's there in yellow, and he's a bit of a jack of all trades. We'll see him feature later on. So 3 kind of veteran guys in the number 12 jersey with a little bit, ever so briefly, of Malia. And then 13, it's pretty much the same faces. It's Moroni there as your leading candidate in the 13 jersey, and it's Orlando as well. So the same 2 guys, minus De La Fuente, who's pretty much a specialist 12, with a little bit of Lucio Cinti there in yellow. So yeah, it's is that a weakness of the Argentinian squad? I wouldn't say it's a weakness. They don't really have a massive ball carrying option in the midfield. They're all kind of skills and playmaking guys. You know, all smart operators, all veterans for the most part, and De La Fuente, Orlando, and Moroni. But yeah, they don't really have kind of like a Laumape or a, you know, Tuilangi or that kind of big Karevi big guy in the midfield, which would be a nice option to have, but I certainly wouldn't take anything away from those guys, because they're all. De La Fuente is personally one of my favourite players, but that's just by the by. And then outside backs, if there's one key man it's Emiliano Boffelli. He had quite a year, didn't he? With his goal kicking and his playmaking and just his work on the wings. 11, he is the main guy on the left wing with over half the game time. And then if you look at the right wing in green, that's him as well. So he's the leading minutes guy for both wings. Spent most of the start of the season on the right and then shifted to the left. So yeah, he's played a lot of game time this year, last year as Emiliano Boffelli. And then other guys who've appeared, Juan Imhoff, they're in blue on the left wing. Lucio Cinti, I don't think he made much impact when we saw him on the left wing, sadly. Cordero and Moroni also pop up as well. And then on the right wing, again, like I mentioned, it's Boffelli in green, then Cordero again in blue, plus Mateo Carreras, who got a little bit of game time at the end of the year, who's been in cracking form for Newcastle. They're in yellow. Batista Dalgui is one guy whose minutes, again, have kind of trailed off compared to previous years. They're in purple, and then Moroni, they're in red again. So Moroni going into World Cup is certainly a great option to have because he can play 12, 13, 11, 14. Like, he can play pretty much anywhere in the back line, can't he? So, Boffelli is your main guy. Imhoff, veteran. Cordero, veteran. Mateo Carreras, great form. I think the wings are pretty well stocked. And then look at fullback, Juan Cruz Malia. More than 90% of the game time. I think there's only one game he doesn't start at 15 for the Pumas in 2022. Boffelli got, I think, one start, so he has to appear, of course, because he's been everywhere. And then I think Cordero maybe shifted to the fullback for a couple of minutes in one of the games. But, Boffelli, he's the main guy I'm looking at in those outside backs, isn't he? He's been just world-class in 2022. Cancellieri is one of the guys who missed out, who seems to be in decent form for his club right now, so another potential option. Chocobares, I think, was initially named at the start of the year when the Pumas were first getting called up, but is another one who missed a bit of game time injured. Facundo Cordero, Ignacio Mendy. There's been a few guys who've kind of not made appearances in 2021, but have played for the Pumas before, so could add to a bit of that depth. So, yeah, that's the kind of depth by position. Now, when we're looking overall, one thing you'll notice with the Pumas is that it is pretty consistent. Like most positions, the leading guy plays more than half the game time. Gaggio does. Montoya does. Cordella doesn't, but Alemano, Lavanini, Gonzalez, Crema, Matera, Bertrano, Carreras, even Boffelli on the left wing, De La Fuente. All these guys play more than half the game time. And then Malia as well at fullback. It's only like the right wing, outside centre, and tight head prop where the leading candidate in his position doesn't play more than half the game time. So if we are looking at that kind of how much of the minutes did the starting guy get in each position, well, the average for Argentina is like 64%, so that's pretty high. It means the starting guys are getting, 2/3 of the game time. Very similar to Ireland, just behind Ireland, in fact, in terms of, the leading guys getting all the game time. Ireland like to play the same guys week in, week out if they can to build that cohesion. Michael Cheika, from what we've seen, seems to be in that boat as well. Like Scotland are behind them in terms of giving the starting guys minutes, and Scotland was also a pretty consistent side. France and South Africa are also more likely to rotate, and then you've got the other sides like New Zealand and England, Australia due to injuries partly, but those sides really rotated quite a lot. So Argentina, much more consistent in the selections with Cheika. And they used, I think, 43 players, which is well below the most sides, like Scotland and Australia, 50-plus players used in the year. But, Argentina much more in line with the likes of New Zealand and Ireland and France in terms of just keeping the squad relatively consistent. But it also meant, because they are so consistent, that some of those guys who popped up in that list of 43 guys who played really only had token game time. The likes of Felipe Escura, Alicio Morales, Domingo Miotti, these guys, Lucas Paulos didn't play much game time at all. So they appear on the list, but I don't know how much they would have gained. I mean, obviously being in camp is good for them to get those relationships with the other players and whatnot, and the coaching staff, but very consistent. And I was mentioning the age before. The Argentinians, as far as I'm aware, the only squad in 2022 where the backs, on average, were actually older than the forwards. Generally, it's the other way around. So the average squad Average age of the Argentinians is like 27.5 across the year, which is pretty much in the middle of the road. Most of the sides, like the French and the Italians, are on the younger edge. The Irish and South Africans were slightly older. The Argentinians kind of right in the middle, but the backs are just slightly older than the forwards, and I think that is due to having guys like Orlando and Moroni and Crevi. Not Crevi, because he's a forward, but Orlando, Moroni, and De La Fuente, some of these guys, a little bit more senior, Udo Projeta, getting a bit of game time. How about the most picked 15? Well, Gajo, Montoya, and Cordella. That's the same as last year, except Gajo has taken over as the leading loose head. Alemano and Lavanini, same as last year, except that Alemano switches from the third guy to the second guy, so he takes Petty's spot at number 4. Gonzalez, Crema, and Matera. That is different from last year because Matera was your guy at 6th last year. Now it's Gonzalez. Crema's the same, but then Matera has taken over from Bruni at 8. So Matera's name is still there, but just a different jersey number. Bertrand and Carreras, 9, 10. Different from last year because last year was Sanchez, only just over Carreras. And then De La Fuente and Moroni, same as last year. Boffelli on the left is the same as last year, but last year Delhi was on the right. This time it's Boffelli again, and then Malia is there at fullback. So, that's pretty much it for the Pumas squad. You guys will have to let me know what you reckon. How do you think Cheika has got these guys lined up going into a Rugby World Cup year? Consistency does seem to be the thing, because, like I said, there was a lot of results where they would just get absolutely turned over the week after having a really good shift. But Cheika seems to have got pretty much a fair idea about what his best 30-odd guys is, and we'll see if he's able to get anything out of them. We've still got a couple of depth charts to go. The Welsh one, the Italian one, potentially the Japanese one. They take a wee while to get together. If you want to chuck us a beer, I would not complain. I'll put a link down in the description to that, because I hope these are insightful. They're kind of one of my favourite things to do, just to see how the teams have been run during the year, to see which coaches have kind of got which strategies going. But anyway, you guys let us know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.